Hi and welcome to Optimum TV. My name is Stephen Adams and today we have the latest in our Dealmakers series where we talk to the movers and shakers in biotech. I'm joined by Edwin Moses, who's former CEO of Ablynx, under whose leadership the company floated on NASDAQ in 2017 and then was sold the following year to Sanofi for 3.9 billion euros. Edwin now holds various non-executive chairman positions at a number of biotechs. So welcome, Edwin.
Thank you very much.
So tell me, you helped build Ablynx over a 12-year period from a small R&D focused organization to a commercial ready outfit of some 500 individuals. And like many CEOs, you had to go on the road and go through various funding rounds to ensure that Ablynx continued. Times are tough right now for many biotech CEOs. It's not the easiest funding environment. So what advice would you have from the experiences that you gained at Ablynx, which might help those CEOs who are trying to raise money?
I think the key advice is be resilient. I think you have to keep looking for multi-optionality. During that period with Ablynx, we raised cash 9 times in 13 years from various different methods. 3 times from so-called accelerated book builds as a public company when you could just build investors' commitment overnight. We did 70 million in venture capital round. We launched an IPO on Euronext for 85 million. And we did, as you mentioned, a 220 million launch on NASDAQ. That's about 600 million altogether in cash. But we also did a 100 million convertible round in 2015 when equity was hard to raise. Found a completely different way. All the banks told me you can't do a convertible, you're a biotech. But we could already see 3 or 4 years away a product getting to market. And so we could approach different types of investors, people who were involved in debt, who were in the same houses, if you like, as the equity investors, but couldn't get into biotech. And we gave them a route into biotech, and that 100 million was the easiest 100 million I've ever raised. And then finally, in the billion or so that we raised over the period for Ablynx, we took about 500 million from collaborations. So it's about having multiple sources of cash that you can switch on and switch off in different times as things get harder or easier.
So you've got to be creative about the routes that you use.
You've got to be creative. You've got to be dogged when people say no, that won't work. You keep on having to ask why. And I'll give you just a couple of examples even. I mean, there was one time in 2014, we're doing accelerated book build. I was sent to the US by one of the investment banks to see US investors. Unfortunately, none of them would see me. I spent 3 days in a hotel making a couple of telephone calls. That's the closest I got to the investors, sent back home. Still nothing was happening. I was sitting here in my office about to send a note to the board saying, look, we're going to have to give up. We failed in this financing round. But I said, well, to my wife, look, I'm going to take the dogs for a walk with you, and we'll have a nice breath of fresh air and switch off all the phones, and I'll come back and we'll send that email to the board. Came back, put the phones on. They were all ringing. The banks had suddenly found Fidelity in the US who were prepared to put 20 million into the round. The round came together in a matter of an hour or two, and it was a success. So you just got to keep going and keep going. And one other example I like is I talked about getting money from collaborators. We had a small deal with Merck from US, and I was desperate to get a bigger deal. I went to a party where I knew the CBO was going to be there, a networking party, and I failed to meet him. And I was going home in the taxi and cursing myself for not having met him. And I had his telephone number, so I thought, well, I'd try. So I texted him. I said, well, I'm sorry, and I didn't get hold of you, what a pity. He said, well, look, I'm in the bar at this hotel. Why don't you come and have a drink? So I did. And in that half an hour drink, we did a $4 billion deal with a 13 million up front. And did the headlines on the back of the serviette, and it was done within a few weeks. So it just shows you, don't give up, keep trying, and then you make your own luck.
Okay. And particularly when times are tough, are there any sort of tricks, maybe that's too glib an expression, that CEOs and others can use to persuade investors to part with their cash? What is the secret to doing so, if there are any secrets?
Yeah, I think the secret's a shoe leather. I think what you have to do is build up trust and relationships. And I think you have to keep doing that. I mean, we've all got the benefit today of virtual communications, but I think there's nothing like sitting in a room with somebody and building up that personal trust and the ability to show that you can deliver. So an example of that is that over the period with Ablynx from 2006, I must have gone to the United States 6 to 8 times a year, every year, for years and years and years. So that by the time we were about to do a NASDAQ launch, for example, we already had 40% investors. But the way in which you built those investor base was by going to them, saying what you were planning to do, and then 3 months, 6 months later, coming back to them and showing you'd achieved it. So you actually start going to investors before you want money from them, because if the first meeting, and this is true in any relationship, you want something from somebody, it's not a very nice way to introduce yourself. So you tell them about the company, you tell them what you're going to do, you come back and you show them you've done it, you build their confidence up that you can deliver. And then when you want money, even if times are tough, they pay attention to you and you've already got them in a very good position to consider your proposal.
Okay, so it's resilience, it's shoe leather, it's building relationships and accepting that things aren't necessarily going to happen overnight, or a question of building relationships slowly. What about the pitch itself? How important is that, and how do you get it right?
Pitch is absolutely critical, and it's got to suit you. You've got to adapt it to the way you can deliver a pitch, and you've got to be able to also think about your audience. One of the ways in which I like to develop pitches was obviously develop them first yourself, and then you test them on a bunch of different people. I like testing them on investment banks, for example, who didn't have a particular interest in that funding round, but who had a general knowledge of the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the investors, and so forth. And you go to different people. I used to go to the conferences where I was presenting, but I always made time to go to see other people's presentations to learn from the way that, for example, the Americans, who tend to pitch in a more optimistic, more energetic way than very often the Europeans do. Europeans tend to be a bit more serious and data focused. And there's things you can get from both types of approach and culture and bring them together. It's quite interesting with Ablynx, just as an example, when we were doing the NASDAQ presentations, we had the same slide deck, but the way in which we talked about it was completely different in Europe from the US. And we learned that from the feedback. And in the US, they wanted to hear about how we were going to launch our new product and invest a lot of money and make it successful. And in Europe, the investors wanted to hear how we were going to mitigate for failure if the new product didn't develop as quickly as we wanted. So it was the same information, but presented to attract the different audiences that you were talking to.
Okay, let's turn to your non-executive chairman positions. What company boards are you on?
So currently I'm on Dark Blue Therapeutics based in Oxford. They're a precision oncology company. I'm on Lab Genius based in London. That's a machine learning AI company using those technologies to speed up protein drug discovery. I'm with Avantium in Holland, which is a company that is quite different. It's in the green chemistry area, so it uses sustainable sources to produce a novel plastic for use in a variety of packaging situations. And Nanosyrinx, based in Warwick, which has a novel approach to intracellular delivery. So very different technologies, very different markets, but all have in common the same thing: great technologies, great people, a great investor group that you can work with to build a future for that company.
Okay. And what, in your view, Edwin, distinguishes a good non-executive chairman from a bad or just indifferent one?
I'll describe what I think works well. I think a good chair should have real experience. I think the chair-CEO relationship, as well as the chair-board relationship, is critical. But I like to see myself as a true partner in crime, if you like, with the CEO. And that means that when the CEO has issues, problems, whatever it may be, they need to be able to turn to you and believe and know that you've experienced very similar yourself. That doesn't mean you have the right answer to everything, but it means that they often don't have someone with whom they can talk. I joined a company recently and we had some very good discussion with the CEO. And at the end of it, he said, well, I've never had a chance to chat to anybody like this where I could trust and say everything I thought about my colleagues, about the future of the company, about the investors, as somebody who I knew had experienced very similar things and whose advice then I could build from. So it's not so much that you tell them what to do, but you provide a sounding board. So I think those are important. I think the chairman has to be someone who's transparent. For example, in all the board meetings I'm in, we have a closed session at the end with just the board and not the CEO. But my deal with all the CEOs is that I will summarize whatever was said. I may sweeten it up if they say this CEO is performing very poorly or whatever it may be. And I won't say, oh, he, she, or it said it. But I will make sure that they don't feel that there's anything being hidden from us. So we have a very open relationship. And I think the other thing a good chairman does is act as a translator between both the executive team and the investors. Very often when you come into a company, you see there's a real communication mismatch. They just haven't understood what each other is saying. And because I sit on both sides of the table, I'm able to hopefully understand what both sides are saying and help them communicate more effectively. And that really makes a huge difference going forward.
Okay. If I might fling in a final question, Edwin, I'm sure you've made enough over the years from the Ablynx deal and others to, afford the supermarket shop every week and perhaps go on holiday once or twice a year. Why do you keep going? What motivates you when you could, hang up your boots, so to speak?
It's a very interesting question, Stephen, because yesterday I was in London and I have every 6 months or so a little get together with people I was at school at. So that was a long time ago. And so six of us gentlemen who've done various different careers. And I'm the only one, we're all the same age, the only one still working in any sort of way. And they ask me that every time we meet together. What on earth are you doing? Why don't you go on holiday? It's because I love what I do. I think I'm blessed. Both my parents were laborers. That my dad was very smart, so my mum, but just because of the war and all those sorts of things, they didn't have the opportunities, and it meant they had to do hard physical jobs all their lives, which they hated. I've been lucky enough to work in an industry like biotech all my life, which is working with fantastic people, great science. The outcomes, if you make them work, improve people's lives, and it's generally extremely stimulating. So I think this is much better than golf or bridge or tennis or whatever it may be. I get my real pleasure from these interactions and solving the complex problems. So I think I'm super, super lucky to have my hobby be also my job.
Edwin Moses, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.